So, welcome everybody at the Disruption Network Lab. I am Tatiana Bazzichelli, the director of the program, and together with me is...
Hello, my name is Lieke Ploeger, and I'm the community director of the Disruption Lab.
So I'm really happy that this time we are both presenting this thing. And also happy, first of all, to say a big thank you to a wonderful team, Daniela Silvestrin, Nada Bacher, and Monty Harmony that work on the production. And Jonas Franchi, our designer, and Giacomo Marinsalta, our PR manager. So I would say let's all do a great applause to them because this event is done like this. Also thanks to everybody. So as I say, this is our 16th event, and the name is AI Traps, Automatic Discrimination. And this event is part of the Art of Exposing Injustice. That is our program this year in partnership with Transparency International that also we want to thank. And what are we going to do today and tomorrow is to have a close look at how AI and algorithm reinforce prejudice and bias from his human creation and society, and also how to fight discrimination. And we are funded by the Hauptstadtkulturfonds, the Capital Culture Fund of Berlin. So we really also want to thank the jury of AKF 2018 that made this possible. And since we are also in the moment of thanking the Senate, I also would say that it's a great moment to announce that the Disruption Network Lab also got a great funding for the next 4 years. So we managed to really have a moment of great happiness this summer. That also means that this guarantees our survival until 2023 and hopefully longer. So really, and at the same time, we want to thank our founder as well, the Riva and David Logan Foundation, the Checkpoint Charlie Foundation, and the Open Society Initiative for Europe within the Open Society Foundations. And we are working in partnership with the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. And at the same time, also, there is a important moment to thank our partner venue, the Kunst am Kreuzberg Bethanien, that has been our partner now since 5 years, and State Studio, where we do our community program. We are also working in collaboration with the Alexander von Humboldt Institute for Internet and Society and the Rogue Agency for Open Culture. At the same time, thanks goes to our media partner, TADS and Ex-Berliner, and also our communication partners, Furterfield and Simwerkstatt. I also wanted to say before announcing more in depth the event of the next 2 days that we have a great comic over there that you can see on the left side, and an installation that is called We Need to Talk AI, a comic essay on artificial intelligence from Julia Schneider and Leila Kadri-Yedzihal. So also thanks to them is something that is also nice and interesting to read about understanding more on the issues of AI. And we are also selling the comic at the entrance if you want to have the physical copy. And I finally we're going to contents that is actually also what our conference is about. And this time we really thought that as many events that now are happening in Berlin, we also want to focus on the discourse of AI. But we want to focus on this discourse also bringing questions because first of all, we really thought that by doing this conference, we want to define what AI is. Because recently has been used a lot as a buzzword from many people, founders, politicians, but at the end also going in many of these events, at least our feeling was that you go out and you are very confused on what are we actually speaking about. Also because the concept of AI is absolutely not new. The studies go even back to the 1950s. And perhaps we should also, in a sense, open up the concept of AI and not call it AI anymore. So we call it AI because people come and understand, but then with all the speakers, the great people we have in these 2 days, we also want to, in a sense, dismantle this concept and start speaking about algorithms or machine learning that are also perhaps better definition for this subject. And at the same time, we also think that we don't want only to speak about technology, but also about people, and especially on the results of technology on people. So understand if we enter into a deep process of automatization, what are the consequences on the real people and the everyday life that we experience. So we really want to focus on the discourse of bias and also form of discrimination that could take many forms. So in these 2 days, we will really discuss about the idea of AI ethics, of AI discrimination, also how to fight discrimination, how to imagine countermeasures. And also at the same time, how AI, or better, machine learning, reflects inequality based on social, racial, or gender prejudice. I think this will be unfolding during these 2 events, and at the same time, we also want to bring, as usually, some questions and also to find collective answers together. So hopefully we will go out after this conference having a bit more an idea what we are actually speaking about and also how we can shape together our future. So it's important to imagine also collective forms of resistance. Now I pass the microphone to Lieke that will introduce our first event of today.
Yes, and before I go on to introduce the first panel, I will briefly say something about our community program that Tatjana mentioned is happening at the State Studio here in Berlin, Schöneberg. So we're running this program called Activation throughout the year, where we connect with Berlin-based communities, activists, and initiatives that work on social, political, and cultural change in the field of our conference topics. So we invite these people to our meetups, which are happening both before each conference and after each conference, so that we get a chance also to see what's happening around the topics in Berlin. But you can also join us to give your input on this. You can dive deeper into the topic after the actual event, and you can also connect with others here in Berlin on a regular basis. So we had our first meetup on the topic of AI and AI bias on the 30th of May. And we invited the community called Xeno Entities Network, and they discussed the topic of AI threats on queer bodies, computational gaze, and toxic normalization. So Xeno Entities Network is a platform for discussion and experimentation and focus on intersections of queer, gender, and feminist studies with digital technologies. And we had a very interesting conversation with them where we looked into artists, hacktivists, and theorists that deal with AI technologies and how they use these as a form of governance and control. And we also speculated about possible counter strategies. So it was a very nice warm-up to this event, and we will do our next community meetup 2 weeks after this event, so on the 26th of June. We're also very welcome to join us. You can find more details on our website, and also tomorrow we'll share a bit more about what we'll talk about at the second community meetup. But now let's move on to the actual program of today. So I will briefly introduce the first panel and also the moderator of the panel. So we're going to talk first about the tracked and the invisible, from biometric surveillance to diversity in data science. And we will hear more from Adam Harvey, artist and researcher, Sophie Searcy, who's a senior data scientist at Metis, and the moderator will be Adriana Groh, who's working with the Prototype Fund here in Berlin. And the panel will go into examples of how AI can create harmful effects and why it is good to track and understand this. And then moving on from that, it will look into AI ethics and the importance of cultural diversity in the data science community, and how practitioners of AI can avoid ever worse and ever greater AI catastrophes. So I'm very happy to welcome, first of all, Adriana Groh, who will be the moderator of the panel. So she's the head of program management of the Prototype Fund, And this is a funding program by the Open Knowledge Foundation Germany and the Federal Ministry for Education and Research. And it's really an amazing fund that is funding open source software development in the field of public interest tech already for, well, quite a few years now. So it's really amazing to see what has been funded through that. And her interest lies in intersections of technology, policy, and society. And she also co-founded WePublic, which is an app designed for digital dialogue between citizens and politicians. And she previously studied public policy and governments in Maastricht in the Netherlands. So welcome, Adriana, and then happy to introduce the other speakers.
I would ask my panelists to also come on stage right now, because that's what I'm going to continue with, introducing my impressive panelists here. Thank you very much for the introduction and the invitation. Thank you everyone for your interest in AI traps, especially on this summery Friday afternoon. Before I introduce my panelists, Adam Harvey and Sophie Searcy, I will briefly tell you that with the Prototype Fund, we fund open source software development, and we strongly focus on software development that lies in the public interest, and we also try to increase, with our funding, diverse teams. So that's why I'm super excited to learn more as well today from the presentations we're about to hear. We funded one of Adam's projects before. It's called VFrame. It was funded by the Prototype Fund. Today he's going to talk about a new project, which he will introduce. So I will start maybe then with Adam to give a little background. He is an American artist and researcher currently based in Berlin. He graduated from New York University after studying digital art and privacy-enhancing technologies, and he has since been exploring the possibilities for counter-surveillance as an art form. His work has been widely covered in publications, for example, by the New York Times, and in his most recent project, which he's going to talk about just now, he questions the information supply chains that are fueling the increase in authoritarian biometric surveillance technologies. It's called Megapixels, and I'm super excited to learn more about it. Thank you for being here. Then I will straight move on to Sophie. She's a senior data scientist and the director of the bootcamp curriculum at Metis in New York. She graduated in electrical and computer engineering and psychology from the University of Louisville. Her previous work, she combined cognitive science and theoretical computer science to build models of how people and machines teach and learn. She also co-founded Electra, a wearable startup. In her input, she stresses the importance of an equal, diverse, and representative data scientist community, and how practitioners need to be individuals of all technical, educational, and personal backgrounds, understanding the effects of data science on society at large. So we hear two presentations for about 25 minutes from both of them. And after that, we have some time to discuss a few questions before we then open up for 10 more minutes to discuss your questions. So you can save them and we will happily answer them. Then I would pass on to Adam.
Thank you for the nice intro, and Sophie, nice to meet. Tatiana, thanks for organizing this. I've been to quite a few disruption labs, but never on the stage. And today, I'm going to mostly talk about a new project that I've been working on. It's kind of evolved over the last 10 years, I would say. And as I give you a short intro to who I am and what I do, it'll make a little bit more sense how I got there. Almost 10 years ago now, I started working on a project where I tried to undermine face detection. Face recognition is what comes after face detection. If you can break the first part of that image processing workflow, you break everything that happens after it. And that project led to continued research on breaking other types of imaging systems. In this case, the thermal surveillance that's used on military drones by developing an anti-drone burqa to provide, instead of traditionally a separation between, as they say, man and God, but between man and drone. And looking at other ways to fool these systems by flooding an image with synthetic faces to act as decoys, high confidence decoys, and had an opportunity to work with other artists and help realize larger computer vision projects. In 2017, I had kind of a turning point when I became the person in the back room. I was running about seven surveillance cameras for an installation by the artist Ai Weiwei. So I built, for the first time, a face recognition system. And that gave me the insight and experience of what it's like to be behind those 7 cameras and have that power at your fingertips. And that kind of encouraged me to become a practitioner of computer vision rather than merely a critic. And that's when I applied for funding to work on a project called V-Frame. What you see here is detecting cluster munitions, not so much related to faces, but this will be, as you'll see towards the end. In order to detect them, we have to create object detection models. To create object detection models, you need data, the central topic of my presentation. How do you get that data if it doesn't exist? You can 3D model it, and you can create very realistic synthetic images to train with. And the project that I'm going to talk about tonight is called Megapixels. And it's an art and research project I've been working on with my collaborator, Jules Laplace. It's kind of emerged over the last 10 years as I've noticed more and more training data sets, and they kept getting weirder and weirder. Many of these are created, researchers say, in the wild, which is another way of saying non-cooperative, non-consensual facial biometrics. The short statement to read: to, I think, understand data sets and how they factor into face recognition, it can be helpful to examine this term face recognition. Lately, it's become the focal point. Everyone is now aware of face recognition, but what does that actually mean? I would say it's kind of the emerging authoritarian logic, but it's based on probabilistic determinations and this ever-expanding multispectral asymmetries. It's not only 2D visual. And really, this creates an unstable assumption about what identities are, that they're static and that they can be contained in feature vector space. In reality, biometrics are not absolute. They become a temporary form of identity verification currency, subject to inflation from countermeasures and exploits. You always need to give more information. You need to enroll yourself in multiple angles and multiple lighting at multiple ages in order to develop what could be called the robust biometric template. A single image is no longer enough. And the same thing happens with passwords. Ultimately, you need to give up your phone number and increasing amounts of information. But where does a face begin and where does it end is a question that seems straightforward, but is more complicated. Does it include eyes, ears, vein patterns that can be seen with infrared imaging? Is it grayscale? When face recognition was first developed in the 1960s, that was all there was. Is it color? Is it 3D? Is it infrared? Is it thermal? Is it a variety of multispectral sources? Is it emotionally comprehensive and updated annually? Is it 1,000 pixels or is it 1 megapixel? So now it gets more complicated when we think about it technically. And what does recognition mean? To explain this, I offer this quote from Desmond Tutu, who did a lot of advocacy for Ubuntuism, not the operating system, but the name that is based upon. He says that I need you. In order for me to be me, I need you to be you, and you to be you. Only through these relative relationships is identity formed. In the emerging authoritarian logic, you are if a system says you are, and if you are not, you're not. If you don't appear as yourself, if your thumbprint doesn't recognize as yourself, then you're not. And that's the end of the verification process. What does this look like in feature space? Well, faces are first detected and then converted into multidimensional vectors. What that looks like when you plot it on a two-dimensional map, a grid, as you can see, in some cases, a fairly clear separation between identities. And here on the bottom, two people have an overlapping space. So at what point does Eva not become Eva? And at what point does Anne not become Anne? There's a blurry line happening that the identities overlap. To explain this, we can consider Doddington's zoo, also called the biometric menagerie, a theory first introduced in 1998, which puts people into four categories: lambs, wolves, goats, or sheep. As the slide describes, each of these have different biometric characteristics. That lambs are easy to imitate. Wolves would be people who could assume the identity of a lamb, as in an actor. A goat would be a stubborn biometric or a difficult biometric, as in every day you appear a little bit different. So your dots on that last map would be scattered all over the place. And a sheep is a well-behaved biometric. Biometrics are also brittle. In 2017, the former director of IARPA, Dr. Jason Matheny, in an interview with Computer History Museum, said, you know, face recognition, it's very brittle. You can just take a magic marker and put a few dots on your forehead to break it. So that's in the context of government intelligence also. Now, going back to the more complex technical definition of a face, can we actually construct a definition around this? There are many varying definitions. Findface.ru, a company says they use about 40 interocular, so from middle of an eye to the other eye, 40 pixels. The American National Standards Institute International Committee for Information Technology Standards says 90. And the ISO 19794-5 passport specification from 2005 also says 90. But in 2017, that increased to 120. According to NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, a face can be anywhere from 40 to 300 interocular pixels. That's actually a very large difference in terms of visual information. And they also say, interestingly, in one of their facial recognition vendor tests, that the best performing faces weren't the largest ones. They were between 20 and 55 interocular pixels. So if we plot this, what we can see is right now between 20 and 55 is what the operational amount of information is for face recognition. But there's a lot of bandwidth that's not yet accessed or being utilized. And if you were to compare this at scale, 40 by 40, when you expand the interocular into the bounding box, you have about 40 by 40 minimum, up to 600 by 600, and that's between 1,600 and 360,000. That means you have 225 faces for the price of one. So I would be taking one face from this room, and in the low end of this, that's one definition of a face. Another definition would include that same amount of information from every single person in this room times 4. So that's a large variation in definition. And what you see happening throughout the last 40 years is an exponential increase in the amount of information that can be captured with a sensor. In 2016, a consumer-level digital camera could yield 120 megapixels. The very first one was 0.01 megapixels. And some of the new data sets reflect this trend. Now, people are producing higher resolution data sets, such as this one, designed for 4K high-resolution face detection. So it seems likely that that last stretch of interocular pixel distance will be utilized in the near future. And now let's talk a little bit about data and pixels. We talked about faces and recognition, but what does it mean to represent a face in pixel space? And I think there's some romanticism still attached to photography that misleads us in the wrong direction of understanding it. If we think about light as part of the electromagnetic spectrum, there's not, in some ways, a big difference between the way that your router receives information, acting as a receiver, and the optical sensor on the camera. Most people wouldn't put these into the same category, and most people wouldn't be able to answer a trivia question of what frequency does a camera operate at, but that's now a question for you. What frequency does a camera operate at? Does anyone know? Somebody knows. I couldn't quite hear it, but if you guessed 430 to 770 terahertz, then you're correct. And a router, people are more familiar with, it's 2.4 or 5 gigahertz. So this is actually all part of kind of electromagnetic spectrum energy. So now let's think about the camera sensor as a scientific instrument that's making a sample or recording a sensor value and just using pixels to record that data in a two-dimensional XY structure. And add to that the face recognition performance scores for low resolution. We can take 42 pixels, 6 by 7, and do 96% accuracy face recognition, 42 pixels. It's about the same. Actually, it decreases a little bit at 168. At 644, it hovers around the same. Now, we're only doing 40 people. And while those numbers seem impressive, I've intentionally misled you, as many headlines do. That sounds impressive, but it's not. Because what happens when we add a little bit more reality to those equations? Well, 530 people, it goes down to 57%. Add 168 pixels, it goes down to 65%, and just under 70% with 644 pixels. But what happens when we actually try to do this for a real-world scenario? Let's take 15,500 people, which is still not a reflection of reality. That number goes down to 30%. And this is from a low-resolution facial recognition study that uses the kinds of images that appear in real surveillance cameras. 30%, why are we even talking about accuracy? We have a 70% failure rate. And if you look at it from that perspective, things change. According to data released under UK's Freedom of Information laws, 98% of matches made by the Met Police were mistakes. So you could say 2% success rate and cheer around that, or you could look at the reality of 98% false matches. Of the approximately 200 million surveillance cameras currently in China, it's been reported that only 15% have enough resolution to do face recognition. And how accurate do they mean? Are they talking about the accuracy that I just showed? We don't know. But what the slide makes clear is that most of the cameras can't do face recognition as we understand it and as we talk about it. Face recognition, it really means face similarity search using extracted feature vectors. And there are a lot of things you have to consider. It's not as simple as the headlines make it appear. Sampling resolution, the camera angle, age variance, obfuscations, makeup, glasses, was the sensor calibrated, is there lens distortion, and many more factors on top of these. Now, finally, you get to the data sets. And to start thinking about data sets, it's important now to realize that these data sets are becoming the programming material. In some ways, they're replacing code. Geoffrey Hinton, one of the original innovators of neural networks, points out that our relationship to computers is changing. Not all of the work we're doing is on the command line, because in some cases we're architecting data sets, and then we push those data sets through a network, and we get a model on the other side. So we're kind of programming with data. And the new project that I've launched looks at where these data sets come from, who's creating them, and where do they end up, and who's in them. The comparison between the data sets that are privately held and publicly held is quite astounding. The largest data set in the number of individuals was MS Celeb, Megaface. In 2016 it was created, just over 500,000, and compare that to the data sets that are held by Google, which have 8 million, and Facebook, which has 10 million identities. The number of photos is much larger. So the only ones that we can look at are the ones that are in public view. And I've collected 25 million images and looked at where they come from. And most of them come from sources that people have no idea they were taken from. They come from search engines. A large percentage, 25, comes from Flickr, and about 11% comes from the Internet Movie Database. And 1% includes mugshots or CCTV cameras that were set up. In terms of where those images end up, most end up in China, but nearly as many are used in the US, followed by United Kingdom and Australia. Now we can look at the actual data sets, and this is where it gets even more interesting, because there may be people in this room that are in some of these data sets. I'll start with one that was acquired in San Francisco at a cafe called Brainwash. It was a laundromat and coffee shop, and a researcher tapped into the live cam and turned that into a head and face detection data set. You can see someone ordering a bagel in here. People would have no idea that they could be their images captured into a data set used for training surveillance technology. So for the site, we look at publicly available research papers that cite that data set and analyze who's behind them, where did the funding come from, and what purpose, and the locations of where they went. And what we found for the Brainwash data set is a few of those papers were from the National University of Defense Technology in China, which is under control, direct control of the Central Military Commission. So how do you have people going to get coffee and a morning meal in San Francisco end up in the hands of a defense university in China. And many more share similar stories. Duke MTMC, which stands for multi-tracking, multi-camera. Basically, you have a network of cameras around a city, and you want to follow someone throughout the city. That's called person re-identification. So I think my time's running down, and I'll go a little quicker. And that one, something very similar happened, but on a much larger scale. So we were able to track 182 research papers and look at the companies that it's being used at, universities. Also, Army Engineering University of the PLA, again, National University of Defense Technology, and a few of the companies that have been providing surveillance software to Xinjiang, China, for monitoring the Uyghur Muslims. Fairly direct, explicit connections to that. The other stories include a data set that was created by using a long-range surveillance camera pointed out a window at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, and the Microsoft's Lab data set, which was recently written about by the Financial Times because Microsoft took it down as a response to press coming out about this project. That was the largest, in terms of the number of images, publicly available facial recognition data set in the world. Microsoft just took it down without saying anything, and that says a lot. And there were a lot of articles written about what is Microsoft thinking, and a few lawyers offered their opinion on it, saying that, in fact, it may be illegal now, according to GDPR. And you had 100,000 people, individuals in that data set with 10 million images. On my website, I mention 24 people who I'm a little bit familiar with. It includes journalists, writers, including artists who have spoken here at Disruption Lab, and even people who are critical of the very technology that Microsoft is building. These are the companies that use that. You can't really take a data set down, though. Even Microsoft, even though they don't distribute it, now it's on academic torrents. It's been downloaded over 70 times, and it's proliferating rapidly throughout the world. Of the 5 data sets that we published on megapixels, 4 out of 5 of them have been taken down so far. And we're just getting started. These are not the only ones. That extends to a lot of creepy stories. In 2017, there was one I found called the HRT, Hormone Replacement Therapy dataset, and this was created actually for an FBI study. It was taken down, and I think what is clear after looking at a few of these datasets is that there's a big misalignment between what researchers think okay and what the general public thinks is okay. So I'm going to wrap up. I've heavily criticized datasets. What do we do? Because we need data. Well, you could use your own employees, use your own faces if you want to create and distribute a data set. If you're a police force and you believe in it, you could use your squad's faces. And academic researchers could use their academic department's faces. Other people's biometrics are not your training data, so why not use your own? And in fact, some people have been a little more innovative than scraping the web, and they act out data. In this case, a criminal scenario. I thought it was kind of humorous when I first found it, but now I realize I think this has a lot of potential. That if you want to create data, create it. Don't take it. So they're, you can see, acting out. And it's about as realistic as a bad kung fu movie. But with a little work that could be usable. And it can also be 3D modeled, as the project that I'm now working on, which, disclaimer, received funding from Prototype Fund. And what we end up with is something very photorealistic. This is the cluster munition rendering with a danger sign. So we use that data because we don't have any data. So we have to be innovative and figure out new ways to create it. Thanks.
I'm sure there would be much more to say, and everyone would also listen to that, but we have one more really interesting presentation to come up. Sophie came all the way from New York, so thank you very much for being here. Again, at the Prototype Fund, Adam just mentioned, we receive many applications, but we see how difficult it is to fund truly diverse teams. And also, although we put an emphasis on it, that we really want to do that. So diversity in software development is kind of tricky, and I guess it's the same in data science, and it's so important. So I'm curious to hear what you're going to tell us about. Can we use this mic? Yes.
Sounds like it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I want to thank Disruption Labs, Tatiana for organizing this, the 24 or so names I've gotten to meet so far, Daniela for putting up with my bad email habits. I also especially want to thank Adam. I honestly couldn't have come up with a better person to kick off my talk that I'm about to give. I'll give you a preview. I am sort of an unreformed academic in a lot of ways. I left academia because it's really toxic and I actually like to teach. But there's a few things that I hold on to, and one of them is a fondness for just enormous arguments, and really the bigger the better. And there's a few reasons for that. One of them is that I think they're easier to argue against. I think they tend to be more constructive when we make arguments as strongly and as big as we can. The process of reining me in is kind of your jobs. So I'll let you do that in the feedback part. So my slides are up online. It's an accessibility thing. I've seen some people taking pictures. Not everybody's cool with that, but if you want a copy of any of my slides, you can go here. I also tweeted it out if you follow Disruption Labs as well. I'm going to, a few caveats before we get started. One of them is that Tatiana gave kind of a preview of this. In my opinion, AI, data science, artificial intelligence, data mining, machine learning, there's a bulleted list and they're all identical to me. I started out in robotics. I learned a lot of things from artificial intelligence books and data mining books. I now teach data science, and most of the time I'm teaching that I'm using machine learning packages. And I think just for simplicity for this talk, they're all going to be literally identical. And honestly, if you're new to the area, just smudge them all together. The differences are not that important. Additionally, as far as assumptions about you, the audience, you don't need to be experts. I kind of think that AI as a field needs to do a much, much better job of communicating rather than talking down to. And so who knows how well I did, but that's my goal. So you're not necessarily experts or practitioners, but you've heard of things like models, maybe loss functions, things like that. So we'll explain most of those terms that I come up with. And in that spirit, I'm going to start out with a very high-level view of what AI is. Just kind of try to sort of set that foundation and explain it. We're going to talk about two ideas throughout this, or I'm going to talk about two ideas throughout this. The first is a model. Normally, I have a long Borges quote about the library. I forget the title of it. It's a very short sci-fi clip. It's a very short speculative fiction clip. I encourage everybody to look that up, but here's an even shorter version of what a model is, and we can just think of it as a small thing that is meant to capture something bigger. And the idea, when it works well, is that a model omits the things that we don't care about, the unimportant things, and then it retains what's important. And so the idea here is that, like a map, the least useful map, as the Borges story tells, is the one that is literally exactly the same as the territory. This is kind of a very common theme in philosophy as well, like the map is not the territory. If it was, it wouldn't be very useful. Another sort of tidbit about algorithm and model. The industry actually uses them interchangeably. It's not just me being sloppy. Words are very complicated. Anybody, if you have friends who work in natural language processing, ask them about that. So yeah, so now that we sort of have an idea of what a model is, it's something that's trying to condense down information and extract the things that we don't care, or extract the things that we care about and keep it, and leave everything else out as noise. So here's kind of my working definition of learning, the thing that a model does. The idea here is that we're going to start out and parse this piece by piece. The first thing is that time, like causality, this like arrow of time is actually incredibly important for learning. And Adam kind of hinted at that, this idea that we'll come back to, that you have a training data set that shows you maybe your subjects from a certain angle, but you're going to be using that for subjects from every angle. And that's this idea of time, is that what your model has access to is limited by time compared to what it's going to be applied to. So when a model learns, it's going to take that past experience and it's going to update a model. And all that, you can just think of that as sort of like jotting down some notes, writing down some numbers, tweaking some knobs, I think is a good visualization of that. And again, coming back to time, the whole point of it is that we're going to take those past experiences, update the model so that it's useful for future experiences. We're going to set some kind of metric that measures how well our model's doing, and we're going to update it so that the model's improving according to that metric. Okay, so hopefully everybody's still with me. This is a little bit of a lesson just because, like I said, I really like to teach. So yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about a model, maybe in boxology, get a little bit more technical here. So all models are going to contain what we call a prediction function, and for today we're just going to think of that as a black box. And that prediction function is going to take our input data, do something to it, and make a prediction. So in the case of facial recognition, that prediction is going to be whose face it is. In the case of facial detection, it's going to be 0, not a face, 1, a face. So what that prediction looks like depends completely on your context. And then just the last piece that we're going to add to this picture is parameters, which is a very like machine learning or AI term of art, which is just all of the things that your model can change at any time. So we're going to use parameters to determine that model output. The prediction function is going to look at the parameters, look at the input data, and then come up with some prediction. But it's also going to update those parameters as it learns. And here's just like the most fun visual I could find of somebody just tweaking knobs until you get something right. And that's that idea of just something that starts out kind of dumb and obviously not what you want, and just tweaking it is exactly what models are doing, at least modern models. So keep that in mind. As I'm going to now take a step and talk about a few attributes of models, a few sort of fundamental principles of AI models that I think are going to, I'm going to argue that they inform the incentives of the AI companies, the practitioners, the people who are building the data sets that Adam is convincing people to take down. The first idea is that models are always categorically data hungry. And what I mean by that is that if we go back to this idea of causality in time, models are always learning from a limited set of training data. But what they're doing is they're applying that to the real world, to production. And really, like this, I mean this in as big of a sense as possible. These models, when they do things well, they're literally trying to model the real world. Very similar to simulating the actual data using computer graphics simulation or rendering. So this is actually one of the most difficult tasks in AI, and you can sort of think about it, even if you've never actually run one of these models, you can sort of appreciate that you have a set of data, and you might know it really well, and now you're going to have to use that set of data that you have to judge how the model is going to do on data it doesn't have. So to sort of give you an idea of maybe what that feels like, I want you to go into the mind of a model as we're looking at this data set. This is the CIFAR 100 data set. One of my favorites for a few reasons. They're tiny pictures, so they're easy to plot out. It's small, so you don't have to buy GPUs in order to run models on them. Frogs are cute. So let's imagine that we're doing object detection, and we have 32 by 32 pictures of trucks, of boats, of deer, and we also have all of these frogs and a few thousand more. And we're just going to try to say, okay, we have a 32 by 32 pixel picture, is it a frog or is it something else? The thing that these models need to deal with is that we may have a new frog that is, because it's in production, it's going to be surprising in so many ways. It could be a different species. The lighting could be different. The background could be different. Did I already say it could be from a different angle? There are so many differences here. It could be from a different camera. There are just like so many variables to control in production. And when you control all of them, you're essentially, like I said, modeling the entire world. So that's the reason that having more data is typically better. I think Adam explained it really well, where if you truly want to have a biometric profile of a person, you want them from every angle, you want them as they age. If they're trans, you might want them as they transition. And I'm going to argue that up until now, there have been good reasons for companies not to do that, not to collect literally every single speck of data they could on every single population. So traditional models, and if you know the buzzwords, here they are: support vector machines, random forest, k-nearest neighbors, even kind of old school neural networks, they operated in what's called batch mode. And all that means is that they looked at the entire data set at once. So if in the SciFAR data I have 60,000 pictures of tiny frogs and boats, a traditional model is going to look at every single picture at once whenever it's tweaking those parameters. And then it's going to say, all right, is every single picture giving me the right prediction that I want? If not, it's going to tweak it until it does. And in these cases, training time increases with data set size. And I'm going to try to keep this not super technical. I'm going to try to keep it equation light. So I just want to visualize what this looks like. So this is actually the way computer scientists do it too. I'm using clip art or emojis, but literally this is how I teach computational complexity. So the idea, we want to think about, okay, we have a data set, a unit of it, which is a floppy disk. For the young folks, that's what we used to use to store data. And then we have a unit of time. Maybe that's an hour of training, maybe it's 5 minutes or a coffee break. The idea is, what happens if you double that data set? We've already said your model's going to get better because you'll have more angles, more examples of your training data. But typically, for these traditional models that I mentioned, the time to train doesn't increase linearly. It doesn't increase in any friendly way at all. So here, we're going to go from 1 unit of time to 4 as we double. And then as we double again, we're going to go from 1 unit to 16. And I think I got the right number of clocks. So what this looks like in the computer science world is called complexity, big O complexity. And all that is it's a way to simplify down like what this complexity looks like. So instead of predicting exactly the number of seconds that your model is going to take and predicting how it's going to be on like your computer versus my computer, we talk about big O, which is just this general big picture, like what is it in the limit? Like when we go to infinity, what does it look like? And so in this big O complexity, traditional models occupy the space that's n squared, which depending on if you're solving some of the traveling salesman problem, n squared is a miracle. But if you're doing machine learning or if you're doing data science, n squared is actually kind of terrible for the reasons I showed you. That means that if we're trying to meet the criteria that Adam was talking about and get the best biometric reading of every single person we want to measure and track, we're going to pay more and more and more as our data set gets bigger. So that sets me up for the big problem, and this is the big part of the argument. The idea here, I'm going to suggest that it's a worthy endeavor to fight for diversity in data science. It's a worthy endeavor to kick shitty data sets off the internet as best we can, and we know that that's ultimately a really difficult process. But I think on top of all of that, there's a potential, and if I'm right, that means that we're actually sort of shoveling water out of a sinking ship with a bucket. And I really just want us to look at the hole that's sinking the ship before we sort of set our priorities in the future. So the thing that caused that hole, in my opinion, is stochastic gradient descent, which is a big buzz phrase, kind of buzzword. So in the last decade or two, AI has shifted to these approaches that strongly are going to incentivize much larger data sets. What they're doing is they're removing those speed limits. SGD is the thing that powers, it's at the heart of all of the big fancy models you're reading about in whatever your tech news site you read about. The deep fakes are all powered by SGD. In addition to that, SGD, all of the traditional models that I mentioned, there's a stochastic gradient descent version of them. And in general, this is a good thing. When I teach this to my students, I teach it like it's a miracle of technology. Like, we solved the problem. And it really, from the data scientist perspective, it really means that we've solved the problem. We've removed the speed limits from the road. Nobody's going to give us trouble over it. But here I'm going to really quickly sort of try to explain to you why it looks this way and what is happening. So let's think about not stochastic gradient descent. Let's just think about what is happening when we talk about gradient descent. So as I said, these models are trying to measure their performance. They're just trying to put a number on how well they're doing. And if you've never heard of the idea of loss, that's what this is. A loss is just sort of a negative score, and we just want a lower score. And so the idea in terms of the knob tweaking is you put a number on that model's performance, and then you look at all of your knobs, and you determine if it's going down when you turn it right, or if it's going up. And since it's loss, we want to reduce our loss as much as we can, so we just turn the knob in the direction that takes loss down. It's really that simple. Gradient descent is not a very complicated thing. Stochastic gradient descent is not very complicated. To apply this to big models, we just do this for every parameter many, many times. So what's the difference with stochastic gradient descent? Here, instead of using the entire data set, instead of using all 60,000 images at once, we're going to chunk it into mini batches. We're just going to do 30 at a time. And this wash, rinse, repeat process, we're just going to do on that mini batch. So just like we did with the whole data set, but now it's a single one at a single time. Okay, so what is the big deal? At NeurIPS, which is the big deep learning AI conference every year, this year a paper won the Test of Time Award, which is, in this field, kind of an incredible thing. So the paper that won was the trade-offs of large-scale learning. It came out in 2007. It's 12 years old. I still recommend it to my students who are doing the best and like wanting to learn more about data science. It is truly an important and classic paper for this one result that I've highlighted here. And the idea is that for stochastic gradient descent models, the amount of time that it takes to fit a model actually doesn't depend on the size of the data set. And that's with a lot of caveats. Like it's saying, okay, if we hold everything constant, and obviously we're not going to, but if you imagine we hold everything constant, then the time to train these models doesn't increase. What that means is that you can actually increase the time to train these models by making the models bigger or more complicated or more powerful. So here, just like using that same visualization, just to sort of like drive the point home, the idea here is that if we have a data set that's 1 unit, maybe 1 million photos, it's going to take 4 hours for us to train it. And we know that we're going to do better if our data set's bigger. So if we increase it to 2 million photos, it's still going to take the same amount of time. The difference is just that the model is going to have a better estimate of that real world that it's trying to model, that it's trying to understand and communicate whenever it's making those predictions. So it's getting better, like a better idea of what the real world looks like in about the same amount of time. And that's even true if we quadruple the data set. So what does that look like in terms of the big O that I talked about, this like computer science idea? We're moving here from this like really bad red zone, like all the way down to the very, very, very lowest. And it's not even log n. I think this chart, because it's not log scaled, undersells what's happening. We're actually big O of 1. We're constant. We're not changing the amount of time it takes to train these models. So what's the effect of that? How does that change the game for data science or for AI? So here's another extremely well-cited paper. It's one that everybody sort of looks at before they go to their big fancy job at Google or Facebook or whatever. The idea here is that this paper spends a lot of time talking about how the image data sets that Adam was talking about mostly haven't changed over time. There have been a few public ones released that were bigger, but ImageNet, for instance, is the sort of gold standard, and it's kind of been constant. It has, I think, 100 million images. It's had that since 2012, and it's still, for most purposes until very recently, the biggest object recognition data set. And here these folks are just saying, okay, what happens if we take this 100 million data set and just triple it? So you can see here, and what you can see with these lines just increasing as they go to the right, is that as we're increasing the size of the data set, the model is still improving every single time. So like Adam was talking about, we're actually pretty bad at facial recognition when we go into production, when we go into the real world. The problem is that for a lot of these companies, for the FBI in the US, the solution is more data. And this is not just hypothetical, this is not just theoretical. This is Karpathy. This is like a very well-respected, well-read guy in AI. So this is from a talk that he gave about what the difference is if you're going from a PhD and you're getting an applied job in the real world. Like, how is your life going to change? What's the difference in your focus? And maybe what should you focus on now? And the idea here is that, like, these real companies, whether it's Tesla or Google or whatever, most of their engineers are spending most of their time talking and thinking and staying up at night because of data. Okay, so that's really, really, really bad. And here's why. So I think this is a very broad gloss. So I kind of expect to get pushback on this, but I would say that all AI models either are going to replace a human's work or create new forms of labor that were no longer possible. That's pretty much the only way, other than like when I have a hobby project, that's like the only way for an AI model to even enter the earth. And the problem with these is that both of these uses of them are only profitable at scale, or they're most profitable at scale. So every company that is implementing any single thing with AI, they're always going to be better off if they just make it bigger and better. Everyone here, if you haven't read Cathy O'Neil, you need to read Cathy O'Neil. She wrote Weapons of Math Destruction. She's one of the, like, my best respected speakers on the topic of ethics in data science or AI. She defines a weapon of math destruction along 3 sort of items. Opacity, whether or not you can sort of introspect into it and understand what's happening. Scale, and then damage, whether or not it causes harm. I'm focusing here on scale because I actually think that at scale, you really then create incentives for opacity and damage, or you remove the incentive to even care about damage. So if you put yourself in the shoe of a giant, evil, don't be evil tech company, what does it mean to make a bigger model? Like, how does that change your life? Well, I think the top line thing, the most obvious thing is that I was talking about is like, okay, your model's going to perform better. Your accuracy is going to improve. Your error is going to decrease. But on top of that, think about Facebook. Facebook has a monopoly on tons of data and content. Like we were just talking about, the biggest, best data sets are all privately held behind these walls of these companies. And that's by design. They lose their competitive advantage if they give other people their data. So getting bigger and bigger means you have that monopoly. It also means that you control the job market. You're both the only buyer and the only seller of this data and the processes for producing it. Not only that, and you can really see the sort of regulatory capture in the US, which has had maybe the same, if not more reason to implement something like GDPR for as long as Europe has, and just as we've kind of sat on our hands. And the reason is some of the most wealthy companies in the entire world are US tech companies. They have a ton of leverage over these regulators. And so as we're sort of increasing the incentive for these AI companies to make bigger and bigger models, we're running into all of these things, which even the first one I think is debatably bad when we're talking about tracking populations. But the other 3 I think are sort of just uncontroversially bad for everyone. And so my argument and the sort of warning I want to give to the room is that these incentives, like tech companies have always been able to benefit from, capture, everyone wants a monopoly. Like every capitalist wants to own the market, of course. But the problem is that before there was a speed limit. There was a technical speed limit that kept companies from being able to do this. And now that's gone. So really quickly, this is the part that I'm worst at, is knowing actually what to do about it. So I'll give that a shot for a couple of minutes, and then we can go to the questions. So the idea is that there's this fundamental incentive for AI models to scale. And I think it's really important to understand that this is not going to be fixed by a technological advance. Like, I'm not going to build a better model that will fix this problem. I fight every day for diversity in this industry. That's not going to fix it. Like, if we are the cops of the world and we're more diverse, then like the world is still fucked. Additionally, quantifying bias, removing bias, like all of the work that it's good work to do these things, but if I'm right about this underlying problem, they're not solving it at all. That problem is still going to remain even if we take all of these public data sets down. So, okay, what can we do about it? There's a few things, I think, and they're all sort of, the big commonality here is that they require power. So in order for this to work, an industry this industry has to be treated as if it has inherent risk, like from day one. Every model that is built has to begin with a presumption of harm that we then quantify the way you would a medical device or a new drug. There needs to be professional accountability. You know, a Hippocratic oath of data science is something that's talked about a lot. It could be good. The question is then, like, where's the teeth? And in addition, we need more regulation like GDPR. We need stronger regulation. I can't tell you how, it's like honestly jarring to go to Europe from the US. I've not been to Europe since GDPR passed, and just to see all the websites that are just like, oh, psych, I can't use your data anymore. Too bad. And these are websites that I use every day in the US, and they never have a problem with it. So I think as we're doing this, we can think about a couple industries. I think if we're thinking of AI positively, we can think of the medical industry, which does a lot of good, but needs to be regulated because it has a great potential for harm. Or conversely, the weapons industry, which is just every weapon is going to be bad by default, and maybe we can figure out how to use it for good if we're really, really careful, but that's not the assumption. So there's my sort of big argument. I think AI is broken, so let's go to the feedback.
Thank you. Thank you very much to both of you. I think we were a little bit longer in the presentations, and I don't want to cut from the time that we have for questions. So I think we can maybe keep our panel discussion shorter so that everyone has time to ask direct questions or general questions. And I had some more specific questions, but you kind of stopped with regulation. And I'm a political scientist. I love broad questions about society and politics. So I went to a couple of panels and talks about AI, and there was this kind of buzzword bingo that is always coming up. It's like transparency, of course, data protection, algorithm accountability, ethics. So this is always kind of like dropped in a conversation. And then when we talk about transparency, there's often the talk about open source and open data. And then we come to regulation, and regulation is more than just transparency. It needs to be around citizen rights in automated decision making. So then I looked up some kind of AI regulation, for example, by the European Commission or by Alphabet. And this is not a direct quote, but kind of paraphrasing. Alphabet basically says, we do it when the likely benefits for society outdo the foreseeable negative effects for the individual. This is kind of their standard. And then also I came back to me as an individual, and I wonder, so even if we have like open source and open data and transparent AI, how can I check if my citizen rights in a automated decision-making process aren't violated? Like, who is responsible for ensuring this kind of transparency? And when it comes to regulation, like, who knows and who decides who decides. So I think this is a really, really tricky topic, and I opened it up in a kind of very broad way. We can go down into a more specific way, but we can also see how many questions come up. And my question to you would be if you want to elaborate on this regulation part and on the transparency part a little further.
So one thing that's been, I think, helpful with the project that I'm working on is a lot of these papers previously cost maybe $20 for a PDF, and because of the success of one called Archive, arxiv.org, that a lot of them are now in the public view, and that means people can go in and analyze it and criticize it. But I guess right now the imbalance is that there's a one-way street, that everyone is kind of publishing the research, and there aren't a lot of ways to criticize that directly or obliquely. It seems to be that everyone is still kind of on board thinking, oh, all this innovation is good because it has a lot of buzzwords in it, and that's what the funding is telling them to do. So yeah, how do we approach creating and pushing more work and criticism into the public domain that could benefit the research? Because I think, again, what I've noticed is a lot of people are calling out for government regulation, but if you've seen the Senate testimony in the US with Zuckerberg, I'm not sure that is that close to reality yet in terms of understanding the complexity of these systems. I mean, so until those experts are linked closer together to the decision makers in government, I think by getting more public critique, so valuing public critique as much as the funded public research, getting that more out there.
So it's like civil society interests against lobbying from big companies, because they have access to decision makers way better than. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, so in terms of transparency, I sort of skipped over that, as you noticed. It's one of, like, opacity is one of Cathy O'Neill's 3 points. I fully agree with her. I think it's super critical. Opacity is one of the things that can make something change from deeply destructive to actually neutral or maybe even helpful. The problem with opacity, and the reason that I wasn't talking about it today, is I don't think the incentives are very complicated, and I don't think they've changed at all recently. So every one of these, like Facebook, for instance, has a lot of open source tools. React powers a bunch of their web. It's completely open source. And the problem is, for Facebook, they make things open source when it benefits them. If they're building a platform they want everyone to use, they're going to open source it because it's friendlier to use. But if they're building an AI model that's recognizing faces or tracking people, or if they're collaborating with government contracts, they have no incentive to make that open source. They actually do have the incentive to tell us they're very open source and they're committed. They have the incentive to sort of flash those credentials, but at the end of the day, it's going to be about their bottom line. And that's kind of, I'll probably get back to it, but that Google or that Alphabet quote, I think, is like one of my favorite quotes to hate on, so I'll be chewing on that.
Yeah. So would it be a possible solution to kind of regulate in that field and say we have a catalog of criteria when we need to have open source software, so it's not just when it benefits them or when it not benefits them?
Yeah, absolutely. And the whole point is that we can't trust these companies to do the right thing for, like, whatever reason. They're sort of set up specifically not to. If they ever had the choice between doing the right thing and their bottom line, they're never going to choose the right thing. So then we fall to regulation. I think state regulation is actually really, really good. And then direct action. We've seen several examples recently of the people who work for tech companies actually creating change. The Google walkout is going to be an example for decades to come that we're going to look to and see, like, okay, how do we organize? How do we actually affect change in these companies? And the key point, though, is that, like, it's never to trust the company to do the right thing. That's the worst decision.
So that would mean that maybe also the line of thought that we follow with the prototype fund, which is it's public money, so it's public code, that's why we only fund open source software development, to skip the public money part and be like, public interest, public code. But that would mean that we need to have a really clear-cut definition, I guess, on what is public interest, and probably Facebook, for example, would not agree to this kind of definition when it makes them do things they don't want to do. So we're also a little short on the time now for the panel discussion, and as I said, I think I know that there will be some questions. So instead of having a conversation just between us three, I would really like to hear what kind of questions come up from the audience. So we have enough time for that. Do we have a microphone, or do I need to give up mine? We do. Okay, so then I would say let's start with the questions from you. There's one.
In theory, there's something like the right to be forgotten. How does that work for datasets? Can they be regulated in retrospect, or once you're in, that's it?
I think they may be able to, you can't delete it because now it's proliferating all over the world in many different ways. But there is a possibility for the people who create it to, in some way, nullify it and say, this cannot be used. People have to cite it when they publish public research. And if you can't cite it, then you can't prove the algorithm that you're working on. So it's not a 100% solution, but that would, I think, contribute a lot to closer to the being forgotten.
I think I read somewhere a quote by you saying that once a data set has been out there and you take it down, it's never really disappearing. And you just said that you cannot quote it anymore in research, but not everything is, like, we not only use it for research, also you mentioned military use, so those people wouldn't probably mind if some data set has gone. So what can we do about those data sets we need? Do we have to build an alternative set, like you just proposed, use your own faith and the people that work with you? Or do we have to try to work with those people who already have the data sets and try to improve the data set, make it more ethical, to use a buzzword? What could be a possible solution? Because the solution is not having data sets anymore, because we need them. But what kind of data sets?
Yeah, I'm not anti-data set, but a lot of these clearly step over the line. Even though the IRB at University of Colorado Springs came out and said this was not a violation, the Colorado data set, but in the case of the Duke data set, it actually was a violation. The data set should not have been created and distributed as it was, and it's been taken down and probably won't go back up. But you have at least 5 derivatives of it. There's a re-identification image data set, and it's used in challenges and workshops all over the world. It is the most popular academic person re-identification data set that eventually turned into a face recognition data set, because you just don't know what people will use that for in a few years. So I think they need to be cleaned up, and there needs to be more clear rules established for researchers by the IRB. In most cases, I would say, because I'm approaching it from a technical perspective, that researchers should be given the freedom to think about all different crazy ways to create data sets, and they need someone to bounce that off of. That could be the job of the IRB, but maybe someone else needs to step in if they can't do that.
Yeah, I think Adam's more of the expert here, but I would just add, I think the goal of this is not necessarily to create sort of a universe where you can delete something from the internet. It's really, since that's impossible, and since there is a right to be forgotten, it's to force us and force these companies to carve alternative paths. And that's like exactly what Adam's saying. And I think that's really the answer in the direction. It's not really to sort of like regain this right to be forgotten with the same kinds of data sets. It's just not to have those at all.
Yeah, and the companies need to be held to much higher accountability. If any of us were to give a data set to a foreign military department, that would clearly be a bad idea. And why aren't people, laying the same, charging Microsoft with the same level of giving data to a university, military university? So it's a lot more accountability needs to emerge in these situations. What we know is very small. I mean, 100, 150 citations. What we know is very small compared to what we don't know, who has those data sets. But surely, if academic organizations have them, then the real big players also have them. They're just not publishing in the public domain. So what you see is a very small percentage, and the reality is much worse than what we can know and present on the site.
Yeah, now we're kind of political. I like it. But do we have more questions? Yes. One over there and one here. Yeah?
If you can keep your hand up.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Hi, thank you very much for your interesting talk. I have a question that occurred to me when you were talking, Sophie, and I was thinking about the way that concepts and categories are not natural kinds, so they're human-made. For example, you have the traditional philosophical example of what distinguishes a human from a bird. A human is a featherless biped, and then somebody came and had a chicken who had removed all their feathers, and said, "Oh, look, a human." Anyway, so these categories and concepts are not natural occurring, but human-made, and what are the implications for AI in that regard? Are there any kinds of implications?
Oh my gosh, did you read my CV? This is like a rabbit hole that I could get lost in. So I studied concept learning, specifically representational concept learning, in the PhD that I didn't finish. There's a lot I could say. I want to sort of not take up all of the time. One thing is, many of these categories, it depends on what you mean by natural. So there's speciation is actually a natural process of sort of creating modes around different species because they can't interbreed. So there's actually a lot of actual natural categories within the world. And I think whenever you get into sort of figuring out, I think this is very much related to sort of introspection of these deep learning models. They were previously sort of derided as black boxes, and in the last couple of decades there's been a ton of work just figuring out what they even mean. Turns out a lot of visual deep learning models process things very similar to the way our brains do. And so they build up from smaller grain features to higher level objects, very similar to that. As far as, I guess I don't want to get too far afield, so maybe could you make sure that I have your specific question as far as the representations and concepts and categories?
Gendered and racial divides in the way, for example, in facial recognition technology that
Oh
happens.
God, yeah. Okay, so gender's a fun one. So yeah, if you assume that gender's binary and you separate everybody into binary classes, you can, I forget what the best facial recognition or gender recognition models do. It's something like 85, 90%, which is, it's kind of comical that we can identify dogs versus hamburgers better than we can gender in those terms. And I think problems like that indicate sort of just a logical, a problem in the framing of the entire problem. And so I think anything like that, this is another one of my hobby horses that I didn't get to talk about, but there's a whole nother sort of thing to say about the big problems in data science often come from poorly framed problems, such as let's predict where crimes are going to occur, and let's only use the existing crime data from where we're policing. And so those are sort of logical fallacies, very similar to the category fallacy of just assuming binary genders and then measuring binary genders and then giving yourself a pat on the back when you do it better than the next person. But yeah, I can open that up too.
We'll have another question. Yeah.
Yes, thanks a lot for your great presentations. I wanted to focus a bit on the second point of the panel, that is diversity in data science, because since we are also speaking about bias and the consequence of AI on people, I think it's also important to focus on the way AI is constructed by people. And so also, Sophie, I know that you work a lot on this subject. You also train people in data science. Would you like to elaborate a bit more on that? So how can we work with the people that are in data science? How we can transform this sector from within, also to create less bias in AI? Also, Adam, if you want to follow up on that, I would be curious to know your perspective.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was kind of leaning into the argument and sort of maybe misrepresenting my views on diversity and data science a little bit. I actually think it's extremely important. I don't think that we're doomed and all of our diversity efforts are doomed. But I think the benefits of it are actually more subtle than we let on. And so there's some just like obvious material benefits, like black and brown people, women, queer people, just on average have less wealth, less power in the society we live in. And data science jobs give you that. And so it's like kind of nice to just distribute things better in that way, but I think that's kind of like a Band-Aid. The most sort of long-term helpful or benefits of diversity in data science and AI, to me, are creating the population that's much more interested in that direct change. They have much more like skin in the game than the traditional like Silicon Valley folks who started your Googles and your Facebooks. And the idea is that, and I think you can see this like just plain as day when you look at the people behind the Google walkout. This is not a representative group of people at Google. And I think that's long-term going to be the benefit of pushing hard for diversity in these fields. In my teaching, one of the reasons I'm teaching data science and not like at a general software engineering boot camp or a general AI one, is that data science is a much more diverse field. Like on average, just in terms of ethnicity, in terms of gender, it's a much friendlier field overall, I think, than the alternatives. And so that's why I like do attach to the data science label, even though I think it's basically the same as all the others. But yeah, there's sort of my view in a nutshell.
Well, I'll just say I think that researchers need to be careful when they're approaching diversity, because usually to them it means grabbing more data from the internet in non-cooperative, non-consensual ways. One example is the MS Celeb Microsoft dataset that I mentioned was turned into a derivatives dataset called Racial Faces in the Wild. And the researchers took, who were from IIIT Delhi and IBM, uploaded all of the faces from MS Celeb dataset to Face++, who is one of the companies linked to the oppressive surveillance in China. If they didn't already have a copy, they definitely do. And then they used the returned inferred racial scores to cluster people into different racial categories and created a data set that they thought they were contributing to reducing bias by creating it. But if you read the paper, and I recommend you do, they're inadvertently furthering racist ideologies in their paper using language that's not appropriate to repeat here. So some researchers, while they have good intentions, end up furthering dangerous ideas that they may falsely believe are contributing to positive outcomes.
Thank you very much for listening. Thank you for your presentations.